My pleasure. Thank you so much, Debbie, and thanks for the introduction. So as Debbie mentioned, I'm the product specialist. So if you do have any questions after today's presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen there. And likewise, if you have any questions during the session today, please pop those in the chat box and we can then have some time at the end to answer them. Or if they're relevant to what I'm showing at the time, I'll try to incorporate that into the session. So as Debbie mentioned, today is a bit of an overview of the altmetric basics and then how the platform works, so we can understand how the data comes in and how we track sources, understanding the altmetric attention score, and then we'll go into platform and have a bit of a look around and see how we can create things like shareable reports and some of the other functionalities that we have in platform. So as an overview, if you're new to the world of altmetrics, they are indicators of non-traditional attention and engagement with scholarly outputs that are published online. So this is attention outside of academia. So we're looking at people talking and discussing research on social media. It might be in the news. It might be policy and patent documents, or blogs, a range of other sources outside of the academic sphere. And what it can do is give you an indication of who's talking about your research and that potential impact that your research is having in the community, and also looks at some information about who's engaging with your research. Is it reaching a very diverse audience? Is it a local engagement with your work, or is it global? And, you know, what does that mean to you? So, and another thing to remember is that it is complementary to bibliometrics. So we're not trying to replace bibliometrics here, but it does complement those traditional measures such as the citations, H-index, number of publications. So when you're writing grant applications or other research activities, you can bring in some of these alternative metrics, or altmetrics as we call them for short, and that will help create that narrative. So if we look at an example here, we've got the traditional bibliometrics that are coming in from our platform dimensions. But if you use other platforms such as SciVal or Web of Science, it will be very similar. So you have your field citation ratio, which is similar to the FWCI or the NCI. And then we can complement that with things like news mentions, X posts. I'm used to saying Twitter, so X posts, things like blogs and news as well. And one of the great things about altmetrics is that you can actually see this attention and engagement with your research very soon after it's published online. So what we usually see is the first X post appear, or it might be released alongside of a press release from the university. So that's what we usually see, and that can be up within a few hours. And then we start to see things like blogs mention the work, Wikipedia updates their references to include this type of research. And then down the line, we start to see things like policy mentions, patent mentions, and of course, citations. And another way to look at this is that you can get feedback very quickly before you even get citations. So this is important for any discipline, but it could be very, very important for disciplines that aren't traditionally represented in some of the bibliometric platforms as well. So if we look at STEM versus HAS, the STEM is seen as more traditional research, and they have a standard in the publishing world. So when you go to a publisher, they will assign an identifier such as a DOI, and there's usually journal articles with those assigned identifiers, and these can easily be used to promote and track research. In saying that, we are seeing, of course, more non-traditional research outputs in these spaces, such as things like code and data outside of that traditional article. But when we look at more of the HAS-related disciplines, we see more of those non-traditional research outputs, and they can be tricky to track in those bibliometric platforms because they don't necessarily have those identifiers and that standard formatting. So one of the things that we'll talk about in this session and the session that's to come later today is how to actually effectively promote your research using persistent identifiers, no matter what the scholarly content is. So a little bit about how it works. We have a research output, and it could be an article, it could be something like data or code, a presentation or poster. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the presentation. And then we have a source. So this is where the research is shared. So it could be social media or news. And then we have the actual reference to or mention of that research output. So if we're looking at research outputs themselves, as I mentioned, it could be an article or preprint, data set, theses, dissertations, clinical trial records, online resources, any physical objects, as long as we can assign an identifier to those. And I will give these slides to you afterwards. So please, follow that link if you're after any more information about those scholarly outputs. And as I mentioned, they'll need an identifier. So what we say is, as a gold standard, a DOI is, the identifier of choice. However, we do note that a lot of institutions use things like handles, and University of Newcastle use handles in their repository. It could also be things like a PubMed ID or an archive ID. So we do, or an ISBN. So we do track a number of identifiers. And on this, I will say that we do disambiguate identifiers as well. So sometimes a research output could have a PubMed ID and a DOI, and we can disambiguate that in the background. It's like me having a driver's license and a passport. They both point to me. It's the easiest way I can explain it. And then in terms of sources, we have a range of sources that we track, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this in platform as well, but we cover a range of policy documents. Sorry, the rain has got quite loud here. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. So in terms of policy documents, we actually have a scraper that looks at different sites, and we've built these sources based off recommendations from our stakeholders. So if you do have recommendations for policy sources, please let us know, and I will provide the link to the form where you can recommend policy sources. But we have a global coverage, and things like the World Health Organization, government websites globally, and we update those as those scrapers will continue to scrape those websites. In terms of news, we cover a range of news sources as well, and then blogs, X and Facebook. So with Facebook, we don't look at people's private profiles or their private messages. That's more of things like public facing walls. In Wikipedia, we cover a range of languages in Wikipedia as well. And the other one I'll just focus on is patents. So we at Digital Science have a sister company called IFI Claims, and that is a global database of patent information, and it informs Google Patents. So if you find a patent on Google Patents, it's come from IFI Claims. And again, that's a really good way to show in different jurisdictions some of the impact in industry that research is having. I'm going to now talk about the historical sources, and I can imagine the one that's probably everyone's eyes shoot to is LinkedIn. So we do have historical sources, posts of LinkedIn in the Explorer, but unfortunately LinkedIn closed off the API to third parties in 2014. So We are in continuous conversation with LinkedIn to try and get this re-established, but of course, it's up to them. So it's their decision. Others that I've mentioned there, Sina Weibo is a similar case. So they closed off their API to altmetric in 2015. Google Plus no longer exists. Pinterest, we stopped tracking because we found that not many people were sharing scholarly content on Pinterest. And Syllabi was a once-off integration into Altmetric Explorer in 2016. So you will see those historical mentions in Altmetric Explorer. Okay, then when we get to mentions, one of the things we look for is that link to the research output. So when you're posting, if it's on X or Facebook or even in a news or press release, please ensure that you have a link directly to the research output. So no secondary links. That will create that so that we can track that research output directly. So then what our scopers will do, we'll see this and then we'll go directly to the source. And this is what humans see. So we see this information, and our scoper then will look at the source code of the page and look for the identifier and make all those connections. And then it will create this, which is a details page. And I'll just bring that up on a larger screen here. And this is a details page for a single research output. And we can see some of a summary with the metadata, some information about the attention scoring context. So as we can see, this was published in May 2015, but the last mention was on the 11th of October 2023. So it's still being talked about outside of academia. You can go between these tabs and look at the different mentions for this single research output. And then you can also see the colours represent different sources. So if you do see a donut, this is what we call a donut here. If you do see this donut with a lot of red in it, that means there's a lot of news mentions. And we'll go through that more in the app when we go for a demonstration as well. So when it comes to understanding the altmetric attention score, it's not like a normal citation score. So there are three, it's a weighted algorithm based on these three components. So the volume, sources, and authors. So with volume, we only count one mention from each person per source towards the attention score. So what that means is that if I post on X when it's first released, that will count. And then if I post on X in 3 months' time about that same research output, that second post won't count. However, there are definitely instances where you might want to repost, and we'll talk about that in the next section when we look at research promotion. But just to make sure that you're aware that only one mention per source. But if I wanted to mention on X, and then I wanted to mention on Facebook, and then I wanted to mention it in a blog, then those three will count. When we look at sources, it's really about the reach of that source. So if we look at the New York Times, for instance, that has a wider readership and reach than something like a trade publication that might be very small readership and even subscription-based to some of those articles. And then in terms of authors, this is coming from the X breakdown. So if we look at a science communicator or practitioner, that would weight more than a journal just tweeting the link about the research output. Another thing to remember about the attention score is that unlike the normal citations, a high attention score doesn't not necessarily mean it's positive and that there's impact or quality in that. So I've got an example here on screen. So this research output, you may have seen, it linked autism with immunizations and vaccinations, and it received a lot of attention, both inside and outside of academia. And as you can see, it's got a very high attention score here. So it was published in 1998, and what we can see is even up until recently, and probably more so recently, we can see a lot of commentary around this research output, and it's not all positive. So what we say is at altmetric is it's very important not to just focus on the score, but to look past the score and look what people are actually saying about your research. And that's where those golden gems lie. And sometimes a high attention score can mean a different thing. So this about climate change, this report about climate change has a very high attention score. It's been mentioned across a number of different sources in altmetric. And if we look at the platform, what we can see is that it's actually been mentioned at specific times, and these are linked to catastrophic events. So that's one of the great things you can see about altmetric is when is your research being mentioned and is it aligned with any particular events? So it might be something that's happening in the world. It might be that it's National Heart Week, and that can also give you clues about when to post about your research as well, which again we'll talk about in the next section in research promotion. And here we can see some of the commentary around this. So on X down here, we have Gavin Dillingham has mentioned this research. And if I look at his profile a bit further, I can see that he's the Director of Clean Energy Policy at the Houston Advanced Research Center. If I look at here, Business Insider, I can see here that this is research output has been mentioned referring to the Paris Agreement, and there's Wikipedia mention here, and that's about climate change, and they've updated their references to include this research output, and then policy. So this research output was cited by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So these are the things that we say are great about altmetric explorers. You can actually see where and who has mentioned your research. And sometimes a smaller attention score can tell a different story. So this research output here has a relatively low altmetric score of 21, but as you can see here, it's been mentioned in 260 patents. So again, if you're looking for that translation into industry and that potential impact, you can see that this particular research output is having impact in that regard. So looking at those insights and information from those non-traditional citation sources is also really important. I'm going to go into platform now and we can have a look around, but before I go into platform, I just want to let you know about some of the sessions that we have coming up. So today from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m, we have the attention seekers. So this is looking at how to get that credit for the work that you do and that you deserve. So looking at bringing attention to your research through effective research promotion. And Friday the 20th, we have 2 sessions, one on industry and community impact. So looking at how we can identify where research has been translated into impact or engagement in these areas, and then showcasing research. So this looks at the research that you have at University of Newcastle and how you can work together with your media and comms teams to promote the research effectively and understand what's happening at research in the research at University of Newcastle. Okay, so I'm going to switch over now into the Explorer. I'll just see, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll just keep going. And I'm just going to turn to my large screen here. So with the altmetric Explorer, whenever you come into the platform, this is your landing page. So it's called the highlights page. And at the moment, I'm looking at all research outputs from the full altmetric database. And we can see that we are tracking 44.9 million research outputs. Of those 44.9 million, 24.5 have attention and 268 million mentions of research. We can also see things like the breakdown of social media, news and blogs, patents and policy, and Wikipedia videos and QA posts, and also things like peer reviews and faculty opinions. On this page, you can see, as it kind of states, very high level information. So the top outputs, the most mentions, journals and collections, top affiliations and subject areas. So again, very, very high level. And as you build your queries, this will update to reflect your query, which we'll do in a moment. A few little other bits of navigation while I'm on this screen. You can see I've got a save search button here. So that will be on every tab. So anytime you'd like to save a search, you can do that so that you don't have to recreate the parameters of your search. I can then flick between these different tabs. So I can go to the research outputs tab, the timeline, demographics, mentions, mention sources and journals, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And if I did choose to save this search, I can go here to my save searches, and then that will actually be saved as a search, and I can choose to receive alerts. So whether it's daily, weekly or monthly emails, so you don't have to engage with the platform every day or every week if you don't like to. Okay, I'm going to go back to the highlights page now. And one of the other things that University of Newcastle is really fortunate to have is an instance into Altmetric Explorer. So as a user at University of Newcastle, you can choose to look at the full Altmetric database, or you can look at specific departments or authors within your institution. So here, if I look at this institution logo here, this lists all the authors and all of the departments at the University of Newcastle. And this is coming in from a feed from Neuro. And that's how we get that hierarchical structure. I just seen a question here, so I'll just... Yeah, sure. So Megan's just asked, are you able to explain where we get this platform, where to access? So this will be through your library. If you go onto your library catalogue and look at databases, you should be and type Altmetric Explorer, it will come up there. So it will prompt you to log in, and if you use your, no, my pleasure. If you use your University of Newcastle email address, that domain has been whitelisted so that you can get access to the platform. And you can use that on campus or off campus. So this is coming in from Neuro as a feed. So this is updated regularly as Neuro is updated, and it flows through into Altmetric Explorer. So here, if I'd like to look at all research outputs from the College of Health, Medicine and Wellbeing, I can view those results really quickly. And as you can see here, my parameters have updated. So I'm looking at all research outputs from the University of Newcastle, from the College of Health, Medicine and Wellbeing. And these highlights will update as well to reflect that. Again, I can save that search if that's what I'd like to look at. If I go into my institution now, I can also do this for a individual researcher, as I mentioned. So we do have those two tabs there, authors and departments. And I'm going to have a look at this person here. So Abdul's got one research output with mentions. If I view the results, again, I can have a look at those research outputs. So you'll see here, there are two things that I'd like to highlight on this page. You'll see here that there's this little blue tick. So what that means is that that is a verified research output that's coming through from Neuro into Altmetric Explorer. So we know that that's from University of Newcastle. So we're not reliant on bylines or anything like that. The other thing that I'd like to mention is this. You see we have this, what we call ghost donut, and it doesn't have any color to it. And what that means is that we're tracking it, but it hasn't received any attention yet. So what Abdul might want to do in this case is go, okay, is there an opportunity for me to mention this research output in a blog or on X or Facebook, and then start to garner that attention to the research output. I'm just going to go back. Now I'd like to show you some of the searching techniques that we can apply. So obviously you can look at an individual at Newcastle or a department, but we can also put some other parameters on. So if I go into this edit search button here, you'll see this My Institution. So again, that's a different view of what we were seeing before. So if I do health, you'll see that College of Health, Medicine and Wellbeing is there. So I can choose to use it that way as well if I don't want to use that other icon. The other things we can do is have a look at specific publishers, DOI prefixes, journals and collections. It might be that you'd like to see all research funded by a specific funder. So if it's ARC, we can see, and some funders have the requirement to report back on some of the metrics. So, you can actually then see Australian Research Council, and what attention have we received or engagement have we received, or have we been mentioned in a policy or patent document? Because a lot of the times researchers don't know. I'm from a research background myself, and I wouldn't know if someone mentioned my research in a policy document until I could see it in here. And then you can also look at the handle prefix. So again, University of Newcastle does have a handle prefix that you can use. You can do a keyword search. So it could be things like virtual reality or something like that you'd like to have a look at. And there's reasons for looking at those types of things. It might be that you'd like to see what other research is out there and what attention they're receiving. So a number of ways to use that. I would like to highlight something here from a personal point of view using the platform. It does say that you can put an author name in here. However, as we all know, many authors have the same name. And also if you use a name like Kathy Hart, for instance, you're going to return heart-related research as well. So I would not recommend using that for an author search. I will show you how to do that in a moment. Things like the subjects. So this is the 2020 FOR codes. So again, if I type in climate, I can see the code there. So I can click that to have a look at that particular field of research. While I'm in the full altmetric database, I can also look at other institutions. So you're not locked down to University of Newcastle. You can look outside of that to see what's happening at another institution or another researcher. So you can use that affiliation there. And again, you just start typing. So it might be University of Melbourne, for instance, and you can select that institution. You can search by the title of the output. And as well as the FOR codes, we do have the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. So research outputs are tagged with those where appropriate. You can look at specific types of research outputs. So things like data sets, articles, books, clinical trial records, book chapters and news stories. And we can also filter by the open access status of those as well. So I mentioned that I wouldn't necessarily look at an author's name in this keyword. What I would recommend is to either use their ORCID, provided that their ORCID is up to date. So that is one method. The other is if you have an author that you'd like to look up, or if you're looking up yourself and you have a list of your scholarly identifiers, I would use this field here. So if you click this scholarly identifiers, you can actually place a maximum of 25,000 here. So quite generous. And this can be DOIs, ISBNs, PubMed IDs, archive IDs. So any of those IDs that we're tracking. So just make sure you do one per line. You don't need to do an and or an or between them. It will just then build out that list. And then you'd click save after doing that. You could do a PubMed query. Again, that's more related to the more medical related fields. And we can also look for publications between certain dates. So that is the publication date, or we can look at altmetric mentions during the past 3 days, the past weeks, the past 3 months, 6 months. Okay. So now that I've explained that, I would also like to mention that you can change up here to my institution only. So if you wanted to look at climate change, for instance, globally, and across the board, you can use the full altmetric database. If you wanted to look at what's happening in this FOR code at University of Newcastle, you can switch over to my institution only. So that's just saying that it's been updated to the 2020 codes. So don't worry about that warning. So that's one way to understand what's happening at your institution and then what's happening on the broader context. So if I go in to the full altmetric database, I will have a look at another department now. So if I look at science, for instance, so if we look at psychological sciences, I'm just going to have a look at that, keep it quite broad for the demonstration, and I'm going to run my search. So what I can see here is we've got 3,271 outputs that have been tracked. 1,800 of those have attention, and these are the number of mentions that we have. Okay, so I've explained this page quite well. I'm going to move on to the research outputs page. And in this page here, this is where we see the research outputs, and you can see that they all have that blue tick there. So they're all from that School of Psychological Sciences at University of Newcastle. Here you can actually sort by a number of ways. So it's always defaulted to the highest altmetric attention score first, but you might want to say, okay, which research output has the most policy mentions? So I can change that to policy sources, and I can see here that this one has the most policy sources. So that's a quick way to understand the number of mentions by a particular source type. You can have a look at the publication date being the oldest or newest. So if I look at the newest, this is where we see sometimes those ghost donuts that don't have any attention yet. From here, I can click in. I'm going to choose one with a little bit more attention. I'm going to click into this one, and that's the details page. So this is for a single research output. And as we can see here, it's got the breakdown, it's got the summary, and on this summary page, you have that metadata, but we also have these three tabs here. I'm just going to explain this in a little bit more detail. So it has the X demographics. So that's looking at where in the world, and the demographic breakdown in terms of if it's members of public, if it's scientists or practitioners. If I move over to Mendeley readers, this has 2 readers on Mendeley, and they've not specified the country that they're in, so that's on their profile in Mendeley, and it doesn't look at their professional status or discipline. This is probably not a great example, but what you can see with Mendeley is that who is looking at your work. So is it a PhD student? Is it someone in your discipline? And I'll try and get another example up on screen. It's got a little bit better representation. So it's important to remember that Mendeley doesn't contribute to the altmetric attention score, but it's just really interesting to see possibly that cross multidisciplinary engagement with your research. And then when we look at the attention scoring context, there's a few metrics here that I'll just quickly explain. So I don't find this one very helpful, to be honest. I don't think it's specific enough. But when we're looking at a particular output from a particular source type, for instance, this is number 243 from this Australia and New Zealand Journal of Public Health. So I think that's a little bit better in terms of looking at metrics. And then if we look at outputs of a similar age, so this is output, when we say similar age, it's 6 weeks either side of the publication date. So if this is August 2023, we'll look 6 weeks outside of those, both before and after, so we get a 3-month view. But I find this one probably the most impactful and the great of the options here. So if we look at the outputs of similar age, so again within that 3-month period from that particular source, so we can see then it's number 3 out of 11 outputs. So that's a really good metric that you can use in some of your research activities. Okay, so now we can go to the different sources of attention for this particular research output. So we can see where it's been mentioned. I can click through to these and have a look at that article and see what it's saying. And as you can see, we do track news sources in other languages other than English. I can look at the blogs here. And again, I can go out and see that. And then in terms of X, I can see who's mentioned this research output, and again, go out to the X platform and have a look further. So I might want to have a look at Terry Splin and have a look at, is this a collaboration opportunity? Is it great that Terry's mentioned my research? What's Terry saying? How influential is Terry? Those types of things. Okay, so the other thing that we can do on the Research Outputs tab is also switch views. So we're on this grid-like view at the moment. If I switch this view, the same research outputs appear, but I can start to see some of the other data behind here. So I can see the authors involved at University of Newcastle and the departments that those authors are attributed to. I can see the subject areas, and again, this is the FOR codes. I can see how that research output has been coded. If there's a sustainable development goal, that will also be listed here. So I actually find this page one of the best pages to export because it has the research output, it has the metadata, and it also has information breakdowns about the different mentioned sources. So you can export this tab as a CSV, or you can open the results in API as well if you'd like to do some API work. Moving on to the timeline, here we can have a look at over time. So again, I can pull this closer and have a look at how research has been mentioned over time. So if I'd like to just look at policy, I can do that. And again, it gives you an idea of when to mention your research and when your research has been mentioned. So a bit of strategic work you can do there, and a bit of reporting as well. Again, you can export this tab. And then in terms of demographics, this is that where in the world. So these are visualizations that represent where these mentions are coming from globally. So hopefully that will load in a moment, but we can do that for X, Facebook News and Policy. So you can take a screenshot of these and you can see that where it's been mentioned, and you get a list there as well. And again, you can click into this. So if I'd like to see all the ones from Australia, I can click into that, and then that will add to my parameters. And then on the mentions tab, these are actually the mentions of your research. So I did speak about the blue tick before, and this is a really good example of where it comes in handy visually in the platform. So here you can see this tweet has mentioned 2 research outputs, one that is verified from University of Newcastle and one other research output. So what we can quickly see is the one that's mentioned from your institution. So it's really a quick visualization tool. And you can use this to look at a particular source. So if I'd like to just look at news stories, I can do that. Blog posts, I can do that from a particular country. And I can even show mentions during a certain time period as well. So similar to mentions is mention sources. So if I was from the School of Psychological Sciences and I wanted to see which sources are mentioning research, this is the page you'd come to. And this can help, again, strategically. You could say, okay, who should we reach out to? And you can also do that for reporting as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of X there. You can have a look at all mentions, or you can show the recent mentions. You can also look at their number of followers. So one of the things that we look at with X is the upper bound reach. So for Ruben's site, for instance, if they've got 3,510 followers, if they've got that reach, that's potential for those people to actually engage and see your research output if they've posted about it. And again, here you can see things like the conversation, you can have a look at those mentions, and you can do a similar thing. So look at only news mentions, only policy, whatever you'd like to do by adding a particular source and a particular country. All right, and the last tab I will talk about is the journals tab. So this is a really interesting view on understanding where to publish. So I say journals, but it's journals and collections. The interesting thing here is we can see who's working to promote your research as well. So for instance, if I'd like to get the most X mentions, if I click that, it will resort. I can see if I'm in this discipline, I would like to look at JAMA Psychiatry or Nature Neuroscience. They're the top two in terms of X mentions. If I want to look at things like policy mentions, I can see addiction, drug and alcohol dependence. Those are the types of journals or collections I might be aiming for. So this page is really interesting to see the number of mentions coming from the particular sources, or you could do the total number of mentions, and we can see JAMA Psychiatry is high there as well. So you can understand the publishing behaviour and the attention, and also using their marketing teams to promote your research as well is a good tactic. Okay, I did mention about the shareable report. So I'm going to save this search for the School of Psychological Sciences. And as you can see, it's saved. So I'm now going to go into my saved searches. And I did show you before about the alerts, but we also have this column here and this icon, which is a shareable report. So if I click on that now, once that loads, that will bring me into a very high-level shareable report. Now, this report is great because it's dynamic. So it will update automatically as long as you're happy with the parameters in this report. You can share this report with somebody and it will update, so they'll always have the most up-to-date information. But I'm going to edit this report a little bit. So if I click that edit button, I might like to give this a little, like a nicer title. That's a bit wordy for me. There we go. I'll say, there we go. And so I can change the title there. I can remove this section, but I think this section is a really nice representation of the highlights. And we can also have a look at the attention source by breakdown. So we can look at the number of news mentions, blog mentions that it's receiving. I can look at attention over time. Now I'm just going to remove that for a moment. So at present, this is looking at all attention from all sources that we track. However, I'd like to break that down a little bit. So I can choose my time frame. So I can look at so say if you have a departmental meeting every month or every 2 months, you can look at setting that up for a monthly report. I can also have a look at just news mentions. So I'm going to keep it at all time for this example. So I have news mentions there. Then I can add an attention chart under that. And this one, I'm going to look at X mentions. So you can tease out all of the different source types depending on what's important and relevant to you. And you can add as many as you like. I think I've added all of them and not had a problem. So that's one of the things we can do. We can also add back in this top outputs list. Now, when we say top outputs, it is by altmetric attention score. So if I add that in now and I edit that, I can choose 5, 10 or 20. So I'm going to change that to 10. So look at the top 10 by altmetric attention score. And there you can see those outputs. If I'd like to share this in a dynamic form, I can then make public and save changes. So what this will do is it won't make it public to everybody, but it will give you a shareable link. So now you can see I have an option for sharing that report, and I can copy that and you can paste that within your departmental website. You can put it on the bottom of your email in your signature. You can share with colleagues, even if they don't have Altmetric Explorer subscription. If you're collaborating with other or have collaborated with others on research that aren't at Newcastle and don't have a subscription, they can still see this high-level report, and they'll still be able to go into platform and see some detail, not as much detail as you would with a subscription. But it's a really good way to socialise and celebrate the attention that you've received in that group. So I can press OK there. If I'd like...
Sorry, Liz. Actually, there's a question that might be relevant here about
sure.
creating individual reports or report for defined group of individuals.
Yes, great question. So I'll just go back from there. So yes, you can. So there are two ways you can do that. If you wanted to do that for an individual at University of Newcastle, we can use that setting here. So you can either go into my institution and say, if I wanted to do one for Maya here, I can view results. And I can save this search for Maya, go into my save searches, and then I can create that shareable report for Maya. So that's one way to do it for an individual. If the researcher is not at University of Newcastle or has a corpus that you want to represent that includes University of Newcastle and possibly other research outputs that they have from previous affiliations, what I would recommend is that you use this scholarly identifier section. So you paste a number of IDs in there, and I think I might have just a minute. I'll just see if I've got a list here. Just a quick list. Search. But essentially, you'd go through the same steps. Sorry, I'm just trying to find. I've got a document with just a number of random DOIs in there, and I can paste that in as well. Let me just, there we go. And so I can use this scholarly identifier section. So that would be if they have research outputs outside UON, or if, again, you wanted to look at a different researcher, we can do that. So I'm just going to put in a whole number of researchers, research output IDs. So if I go into scholarly identifiers, paste those IDs in there. So I've got 37, and I save that. And I run my search. I can see there's 37 outputs being tracked. So we're looking at those 37 identifiers. Again, I go through that same process, save the search, go into my save searches, and then I can create that shareable report for those 37 IDs as well. And you can, again, that's where giving it a nicer title might be better. So you can title that at the researcher's name. You can definitely do that again for a group. So with a group, I would recommend using that scholarly identifier section, getting all of the research outputs from that group and using that scholarly identifier section to report on that. Hope that's clear, an answer for you. Yeah, no worries. Great. So yeah, that one of the things about that shareable report is, yes, you can do a static view as well. So if I wanted to just print that report, it will just print to a PDF, and you can have, so if you wanted to have May, June, July, you can have those static reports as well as having that dynamic updatable report. But I know we've got about 6 minutes left. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to keep demonstrating some queries and things, but if there are any specific questions while we're together, please either put them in the chat, or I'm happy if you'd like to do that verbally as well, if it's easier.
I have a question to start off with. So how often is the data from the different sources updated into Altmetric Explorer?
Yeah, great question. So with the policy sources, we have a number of scrapers that go across different sites, and our product team actually builds scrapers for each policy source, because as you can imagine, government websites have a multitude of things on one page. They might have a policy, they might have a report, they might have an article. So what that scraper will do is identify what is a policy source on that page, and then build that into Altmetric Explorer. As you can imagine, that's quite a manual process. And so our team is actually working on building what they call a super scraper that identifies certain elements of policy documents, and then we'll actually scrape more. So we'll be able to include more. So that's policy. So in terms of patents, yes, that's coming in from IFI claims, and that is updated on a 24-hour basis. That we get a direct feed. Things like social media. So X, we don't follow all of X because, as we know, there are things that we need to be wary of, things like bots on X, and some profiles that don't mention scholarly outputs. So we don't want to overcrowd the servers as much. So we do follow accounts, we do track accounts, I should say, that mention scholarly research. Similar with things like Facebook and things like Reddit as well. So that's updated on a 24-hour basis. So sorry, if I just scroll down, I'm sorry, I don't want to make you dizzy, but if I scroll down to the bottom here, you can see that it's updated 23 hours, and the next update will run in 35 minutes. So that is because we're on a different side of the world than where our product team is based. So as you can see, that data is, so things like X, Facebook, blogs, news is on a 24-hour basis. Dimension citation counts are usually a day as well. So while that doesn't contribute to the score, it does update on a daily basis. Things like policy in terms of those scrapers are continuously working, but it's just as content is added to that, we can incorporate into Explorer. And I think I've covered most of those. So if you'd ever like to look at what we're covering, so if you'd like to see, are you covering a particular policy source, what we can do is go over to the mentioned sources, go down to policy, and I can apply that, and hopefully, there we go. So we can have a look at all the policy sources that we're tracking. I can give you a list after today, and we do update that list on a monthly basis. And we do add in about 3 to 5 new policy sources every week. But as soon as I give you that list, it will probably be redundant. So the easiest and most up-to-date way to have a look at what policy sources we're tracking is in this mention sources tab. And you can have a look for a particular country. So we can have a look at what we're tracking in Australia and apply. And that's taken a little while. There we go. So we can see what we're tracking in terms of policy sources in Australia. So again, I will provide a link where you can suggest some policy sources to our team as well. Great question. Thanks, Debbie. Are there any other questions? I think we've got 1 minute left. Oh, thank you, everyone. I'm receiving some thanks in the chat. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm glad it's been really useful for you. Just one last comment I would make is that if you are in the non-traditional research output space, making sure that you have the identifier, whether it be a handle or a DOI, and popping it on your repository Nova there at University of Newcastle, and the library can help you out with that as well. And I look forward to seeing you at our next workshop in a couple of hours.